Well, Randy, it was supposed to be a day of routine constitutional work. Senator Amy Klobuchar was ready to play a crucial role in the electoral count. And then the unprecedented act of domestic terrorism. Congressman Dean Phillips live tweeted his experience during the lockdown. And Congressman Ilhan Omar has now drafted articles of impeachment against the president.
That Joseph R. Biden.
Senator Amy Klobuchar spoke on the Senate floor moments before a mob sieged the Capitol.
Second floor!
I was just returned for a little bit when all hell started breaking loose at the Capitol.
The announcement was made, and Representative Dean Phillips went to the literal floor of the U.S. House.
The proceedings were abruptly ended by the Capitol Police, who advised all of us in the chamber to take cover, to open our gas masks, which are available under each seat in the House chamber, and we did so.
He and others were escorted through tunnels and basement hallways to a safe place, he said, waiting the violence out.
Every one of us, I believe, in that chamber, Democrats and Republicans, shared that very same moment of disbelief that this could possibly be happening in the United States of America, not to mention in our temple of democracy, in our U.S. Capitol.
Representative Tom Emmer called it shameful on Twitter, saying this type of violence is unacceptable in Minneapolis or in the Capitol. Fellow Republican Congressman Jim Hagedorn tweeted a thread denouncing violent acts of protest, saying he strongly condemns the storming of the U.S. Capitol. Representative Ilhan Omar was in her office when the chaos broke. She was taken to an undisclosed place where we spoke with her by phone.
I'm drawing up our articles of impeachment. I believe that the president should be impeached by the House of Representatives and be removed by the United States Senate. We cannot allow him to remain in office. It is my belief that this is a matter of preserving our republic.
Congresswoman Betty McCollum told us there's no time for impeachment, saying the 25th Amendment should be invoked to remove the president from office.
We're at a tipping point now where the lies have become truths for too many people, including people I serve with. And look where it got us today.
Look, anarchists got into the U.S. Capitol today, but democracy will win. I'm ready to get back to work.
Now, I asked why Representative Omar would consider impeachment with 14 days left in President Trump's administration. And she reminded us that a conviction by 2/3 of the Senate would forbid Trump from running for any federal office for life.